So welcome everybody. I'm Karen Brammer. I'm the manager for the Green Sanctuary Program for the Unitarian Universalist Association. And I'd like to welcome you to this webinar called Advancing Environmental Justice, a Model of Fusion Climate Justice with JAM, Justice Action Mobilization Network. Before I introduce Reverend Dr. Rodney Sadler, I will do a couple of things to remind you of how this evening is going to proceed. One of the things is to remind you of why we're doing this, and it is on a monthly basis for the most part, the intention being to help our leadership, our congregations, to understand on deeper and deeper levels how the issues of environment, class, race, and other issues of marginalization are deeply intersectional, deeply connected, and to try to work on one without awareness of the others can actually do some damage. And so we're trying to educate ourselves, deeply understand it, and then to, in our way of working, to do that in a collaborative way, rather than in a position where Unitarian Universalists are contributors or experts, where we are in collaboration and sharing leadership, or being in being participants of another frontline community-led organization. So this is to really hone our skills, to make ourselves aware so we can think out of the box and do things in ways that are both intersectional and collaboratory across differences in our culture. So that's why we're doing these particular events. There will be a presentation by Rodney Sadler, and then there will be question and answer time with everyone present. And then there will be a breakout into smaller groups where we'll focus on our more localized areas and storytelling and asking each other questions. So I want to first actually say thank you to two other people who are on the team of the Environmental Justice Practitioners Network, and one of them is Elizabeth Mount, who is our tech person, who's also done a lot of the work to get our invitations out, people registered, etc. Elizabeth is a climate organizer herself, and I believe a seminarian at this point in Unitarian Universalism. And maybe, are you a candidate at this point?
I am a candidate for the ministry and the ministerial intern at First Universalist Church of Denver.
Very awesome. Thank you. And Allie Tharp is the other person on this three-person team who is an organizer for climate justice, and right now is a staff person for a collaboration of many Unitarian Universalist environmentally focused organizations. So Allie has a lot of direct action experience and also organizing experience on behalf of Unitarian Universalists and young adults. So what I'd like to do then is to welcome and thank you, Rodney. It's such a pleasure to have you here. Reverend Dr. Rodney Sadler is professor at Union Presbyterian Seminary in Charlotte, North Carolina. He's vice chair of the Justice Action Mobilization Network. And in the website, when you go see it, part of the mission statement says to build a fusion climate movement connecting race and climate justice. And it's exactly what we are learning about and building our capacity for. Rodney was part of a panel at a workshop at General Assembly last year that we called On Call for the Movement and to Rejoice and Come In. Some of you may have been there. And so this is your chance to ask depth questions of Rodney after his presentation. And like I said, after the presentation, we'll have opportunities for asking questions. So keep track of your questions. We'd really love to hear from you. And then we'll break out into smaller groups. So I believe that's all I had to say. Elizabeth, have I forgotten anything? Or Allie, have I forgotten anything as far as our tech is or our process is concerned? Okay.
That's pretty good.
I'm going to do a very brief reading. It's from a poster that I have had on my desk and on my wall for a long time. It's called Guardians. I swear, I promise, I covenant, I will not dishonor my soul with hatred, but offer myself humbly as a guardian of nature, as a healer of misery, as a messenger of wonder, as an architect of peace and justice. May it be so for us all. And now I will mute myself and very happily hear your presentation, Rodney. Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you so much, Karen, and thank you so much, all of you who are joining us today. It is a pleasure to come before you and talk to you a little bit about jamming. And hopefully I will not hold you for too long, but hopefully it will give us the basis of a larger conversation. Let me just start off by talking a little bit. This talk I've been titled, Making a Better World, Jamming as a Spiritual Model for Paradigmatic Change. The Justice Action Mobilization Network. Can you keep hearing that ding?
I do keep hearing that ding. And
I don't know what it is. And I've tried to turn off everything I have, so.
I think it's not mine, but I want to also say to Elizabeth, it may be time for you to have the slideshow up, the PowerPoint. Are you ready for the PowerPoint, Rodney?
Can I control that, or can you control that?
I think you're going to need.
If you just chat me an X or something each time you want it to flip pages, I can make that happen.
How about, so we'll start with slide 2 then. How about that?
Just like a clicker, but with an actual
special clicker. Thank you.
Time delay of a moment.
Good. The Justice Action Mobilization Network, or JAMN, was born from the work of People Demanding Action, a national political action 501c3 that is the nonpartisan expression of the Progressive Democrats of America. The idea for JAMN came from the work of the Environmental Justice Committee. Hello, can you see me?
Oh.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, just want to make sure. The idea for JAMN came from the work of the Environmental Justice Committee of PDAC. During one of our steering committee meetings, Reverend Lennox Yearwood, the president of the Hip Hop Caucus, expressed the desire to bring together those concerned with the environment and those concerned with climate and those concerned with social justice, noting that those who are most significantly impacted by environmental concerns are often those people who are least likely to be at the table in such discussions. The idea came about to sponsor a conference at the University of the District of Columbia, or UDC, on Mother's Day weekend in 2015, and send out a broad invitation list inviting those from the big greens, from civil rights community, from the government, from the religious community, and from the larger social justice community to participate. On that weekend, we were surprised when about 150 people showed up at UDC for that initial conference, with representatives from Greenpeace, the Sierra Club, League of Conservation Voters, the NAACP, Hip Hop Caucus, indigenous communities, even the White House Environmental Policy Office, and also many other clergy and activists from different states around the nation. At this meeting, the group decided that we wanted to develop a continued association, but not to form another organization. Instead, they determined that what we needed was a network that linked people together and pulled them to work on common issues from their various silos. Thus was born the Justice Action Mobilization Network. And it is not by happenstance that it sounds like jamming. In the aftermath of that initial meeting, the group has begun to work at the local, state, and national level on addressing climate change and fostering our larger agenda for addressing the climate emergency and social justice issues, seeking to find synergy between these usually distinct issues. Among the work of JAMN thus far has been a climate justice conference in Charlotte, North Carolina, where we brought together activists from different communities, focused on the work of addressing global climate change and resilience. The conference, held amidst of a hurricane, as a matter of fact, was able to draw about 130 people and featured speakers from across the nation. We've also worked on lobbying for third-party energy sales. We can move to the next slide, please. Lobbying for third-party energy sales, the expansion of net metering, and the continuation of solar tax credits here in Raleigh, North Carolina at the state level. At the national level, we've worked on sponsoring HRES 540, basically a resolution that suggests that we want to move to 50% renewable energy grid by 2030 and 100% renewable energy grid by 2050. Work with the National Election Defense Coalition to foster a voting rights alliance that includes the Transformative Justice Center, and to engage a voting rights caucus in the House of Representatives. This coalition in 3 months has 71 members, which is an unprecedented success. But for JAMN to be successful, we realize we have to have assistance with those who will work on making sure that environmental justice can be voted into law. Working with Representative Hank Johnson to foster a bill to address climate change, to develop a paradigm to foster a shift to a renewable energy grid through legislation. And also, next March 9th through 11th, the Justice Action Mobilization Network is working in conjunction with NYU to have a United Climate Justice conference that will not only bring together climate justice folks, but will also be the basis of a larger documentary that will work on climate issues around the world. We're also involved at trying to bring to realization Mark Jacobson's 50-state plan for transitioning to a clean, renewable energy grid. Next slide, please. JAMN is also a spiritual movement that works to affect change in our world by fostering a distinctive set of values. Value 1, every human being is inherently valuable and deserving of agency in the redemption of our imperiled planet. Value 2, every human being has a role to play in this common work, for the planet belongs to no single type, color, or creed of people. Value 3, the earth belongs equally to all of us, even those of us who are often overlooked in such discussions. Value 4, our efforts to save the planet can foster a better world, featuring a new relationship between peoples and between people and the planet. And value 5, poverty, deprivation, tyranny, and racial disparity are evils that we need to address in our collective work to reverse global climate change. These core values are born of the spirit that animates our movement to find a solution to global climate change by fusing the work on climate change with work on social justice. You see, the only way that we can achieve the victories we need is by bringing more people to the table, by expanding our scope, and by broadening our impact. We also need to foster a larger paradigmatic shift. Next slide, please. The Justice Action Mobilization Network is a climate justice network that seeks to bring a moral analysis and fusion politics to the struggle against climate change. It is a fusion movement that brings people out of their organizing silos and supplements their work on their particular interests with collective work on targeted shifts in energy production. It is an inclusive movement that realizes that if we are to have the victories that we seek, we must bring some of everyone to the table, particularly those minoritized communities that have been shut out of the traditional climate change activism. It is a movement that values everyone's contribution, noting that we all have a stake in the future of our planet, and that it's everyone's responsibility to work for a cleaner, greener, better world. And it is a holistic movement that seeks to bring an end to poverty, disenfranchisement, and racial disparity by harnessing the economic potential of shifting to a renewable energy grid. But the true power of JAMN is spiritual and speaks of a paradigmatic shift in the way that we function as a society. The goal of JAMN is to foster not just a cleaner, greener, better world, but to do so by changing the way that we think. In part, the goals of JAMN call for a reorientation of our values. Our current economic model, is this slide 6? We can go back one. Yes, thank you. Our current economic model is based on a scarcity of resources, limited supplies of carbon-based energy sources like coal, oil, and natural gas. Number 2, it's based on individual and corporate ownership of those limited resources, fostering an oligarchy of those empowered by their control of these resources, and an inevitable, ever-widening wealth gap between the haves and the have-nots. It is also based on the necessity of disadvantaging those who are dependent upon those who own the resources for their survival. This limits personal freedom and subjugates human beings to the domination of those who are thereby economically empowered. It fosters a form of slavery to a system predicated on an addiction to oil and other carbon-based owned and controlled commodities. And number 4, the current economic model is based upon our taking these resources from the earth, violently breaking it up, and stripping it of oil, coal, and natural gas. What we are proposing with JAMN is not just a gradual change in the source of our energy, but a reorientation to a new way of supplying clean, renewable energy to fuel a superior economic model. The new economic model is, slide 7, please, based on an abundance of resources supplied by God and our universe and available in creation, an endless supply of energy from the sun, wind, water, and the earth's thermal energy that can supply all of our needs at a greatly reduced price. It's also based on free access of these natural resources by all people and by a model of collective ownership of the means of harnessing these energy sources. This will thereby democratize the process of energy production and foster greater wealth parity by freeing people from the tyranny of a few wealthy carbon energy producers. Number 3, it's based on the advantaging of all people who are now empowered in a new way to share in the production of energy and the mutual ownership of its means of production. These people are now freed from the constraints of poverty, disenfranchisement, and racial disparity, liberated under this democratized economic and energy production system. And point 4, it is based on our freely receiving these resources given by our common creator and our world. There is no need to pierce the planet, pollute the air, poison the waters, or in any other way destroy our world in order to produce the power that we require. It is in this paradigmatic shift that we can see the full possibilities of JAMN and the requisite work that we have to do. In essence, our work is part of the work of evangelism, of bringing good news of a new way of thinking, a new economic model, a new paradigm for our relationship with each other and the planet to the forefront. It is the shift from a privatized ownership of resources that we all need, from the privileging of a select few, from the taking from and raping of the planet in order to selfishly control these resources, to collective ownership and inclusive prosperity and the freely receiving of what God has freely given to all of us. Slide 8, please. But this work is not easy work, for it will involve us freeing ourselves from the matrix, us creating the space for us to reimagine our relationship with people, the planet, and our economy, and also our modes of energy production. Make no mistake about it, we are wrestling against the express interests of the few empowered carbon energy-based energy producers, those who have a vested interest in maintaining the system just as it is. So our message must be compelling, not driven just by the push of fear of what will happen if we fail to gradually shift from fossil fuels to a renewable energy grid, but also motivated by the pull of a new vision. The push of fear has been the primary strategy used by the climate movement heretofore, and it has been met with limited success. In part, the limited success is due to the fact that the arguments are often too technical for common people to follow. Whether we can afford a 1 or 2 degree centigrade rise in global temperature, whether we are experiencing global warming or global climate change, how many parts per million carbon in the atmosphere produces irreparable harm to our planet's ability to support human life, how many meters the seas might rise in coastal municipalities around the world. All of these are interesting but often confusing factoids that concern matters over which most of us feel we have very little agency. What can we do about that, we say? We must create a new vision and inspire the masses to strive for this new paradigm, and the best way to do this is to show them what it looks like. Walter Brueggemann, biblical theologian, describes the work of a prophet as that of presenting God's alternative vision of what can be and setting it in juxtaposition to the world as it is. In this way, we all need to be prophetic, not just presenting the woes and the dangers of what is coming, for fear alone will not motivate change. People tend to accept an evil that is viewed as inevitable. We must show them a realizable alternative, one that works, one that produces a more just world with a more equitable power distribution, and one that is worthy of our strivings. We must make the vision of a cleaner, greener, better world, more equitable world, a tangible, attainable reality, one that pulls people to do the hard work of lobbying, sacrificing, and struggling our planet from by shifting to a non-carbon-based means of energy production. We must foster a paradigm shift, a reorientation of our thinking and acting by offering the promise of a better, more attractive future for people and for the planet. And we must do this by bringing some of everyone to the table. One of the reasons I think we need everyone has to do with the question, which world is it that we are trying to save? The current climate justice movement is a white, wealthy movement. Don't believe me? I recently did a 2-day event with our local group, NC Warren, North Carolina Warren. And in the midst of this, on the first night, I was at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. We had an audience of about 125, 150 people, and 98% of the population there was white and mostly older, upper middle class folks. The next night, I went to Warren Wilson College in Asheville, North Carolina, and I spoke at Warren Wilson. And that night, there were only 3 minorities in the entire audience, so even more than 99% white. Myself, Connie Leeper, who is also another African-American environmental activist, and one Native American Indian woman who was a student who had come to visit. In essence, this movement has been far too long left to only whites, middle and upper middle class people. These people were committed to working for change, but were solely focused on the climate. And if we only have white, well-to-do people focused on climate alone, the question arises, what world is it that we're trying to save? Slide 9, please. Without fusing the climate action movement with a social justice movement, we're subtly saying that this world is worth saving as it is. That if we got climate under control, we would largely be all right. But we would not be all right, for we would still have black men being killed by officers and each others, still have rampant poverty and families living under bridges, still have Medicaid expansion denied by 21 states, leaving working poor people without health care, still have an education system that is failing black and brown students. I still have HB2 in North Carolina disenfranchising LGBT communities and the black community and the Latino community and workers in our state. We still have workers working for non-livable wages. We would still have extremists trying to suppress progressive, minority, and elderly votes. We would still have immigrant youth afraid to go to school, bus stops for fear of ICE and deportation. Unless we fuse the climate movement with the social justice movements, unless we bring together other people and other interests and other energy to the table, not only will we not have the victories in the climate that we need, we will not have the better world for which we all strive. Next slide, please. I want to talk now about a vision for a better world. If you all would close your eyes with me for a moment and dream with me of a different world. Imagine a world with a green energy grid where solar, wind, and hydroelectric means of energy production provide clean and inexpensive energy for everyone. Imagine a world where asthma rates and cancer rates have been greatly reduced because coal-based power plants have been eliminated and coal ash no longer threatens our rivers and our lakes. Imagine a world where unemployment is a thing of the past because the shift to green energy means proliferation of green jobs to support a new green energy grid. Imagine a world where the shift from carbon-based transportation and fossil fuel industry has required us to replace our old cars and our old trucks and our old trains and our old ships and our old planes and our old heating systems and our old factories with new, greener ones that need a new workforce to manufacture and operate them. Imagine a world where homelessness and poverty are things of the past because we've developed affordable, energy-efficient homes that newly employed people making a living wage can afford to raise their families in and make a life in. Imagine a world where racism is a thing of the past because we finally realize that every person is a child of God, made in God's image, bearing a mark of God's divinity, and deserving of dignity, equality, equity, and shared prosperity in a nation replete with abundance. Imagine a world in which there is no more mass incarceration, no more violence, no more faction-based fear because we have come to value people and the planet more than profits. Imagine a world in which we realize that scarcity was just a myth because our common Creator has given us all that we need, not just to survive, but to thrive. With abundant, renewable energy and an active, fully employed labor force and a planet healed and renewed. You can open your eyes now. This is the world of the JAM network. It is a cleaner world, a greener world, and a better world. And more than that, it is a possible world, for the only thing that stops the world we live in today from being the world that we are imagining now is our choice to make it so. We have the power to change the world, to end the threat of global climate change, the climate emergency, to end the stranglehold of the fossil fuel industry on our world that perpetuates economic imbalances and the commodification of human beings, to reverse the rising global climate temperatures that threaten to end life as we know it on Earth. We have the power to change the world. We've done it before when we eliminated the smog that suffocated our largest cities. We've done it before when we cleaned up the chemicals that polluted our nation's greatest rivers. We've done it before when we reduced the size of the hole in our ozone layer that protects our planet from the rays of the sun. These smaller environmental victories serve to remind us that we can overcome this crisis too. And we have the power to change the world, to put an end to humanity's inhumanity and ghettos unfit for any mother's child, and shelters to house our sisters and brothers, and prisons to profit from the suffering of the poor. We have the power to change the world, and all that it will take for us to do so is to choose to do so. It is a matter of changing hearts and changing minds and changing choices and changing actions to change the world. It is a matter of will if we choose to make it so, if we as a people choose to make it so, if we as a planet choose to make it so. It will be so. Our common Creator has given us a perfect planet fit for our thriving. We have to realize our responsibility to be stewards of this great gift. As I've said in other settings, we are not waiting on God to make this world right. I fear that God is waiting on us. We have to act, but not to act alone. The power of JAMN really is that we really need to work together. We need to come together to stand up and step out together. We need to get out of our silos where we work on our own issues with our own timelines and hoarding our own resources, lifting our own agendas, and realize that we can only achieve this victory if we work together. We need to welcome those of different colors who come from different classes, who speak different languages, who come from nations, who call God by different names into a single movement that unites us all together. We need to celebrate new leaders, to craft a new vision, to dream a new dream together, for it is only together that this dream is possible. And that is the challenge today. As I end this conversation today, let us covenant. Let us promise that we will unite our resources, our efforts, our work, so that we can join in the Creator's planet-saving, people-redeeming, greener world-making, better world-building work together. We can have a better world. We will have a better world, but only if we come together. Thank you. Thank you very much. And now I'd love to entertain some questions.
Ways to do that? Were you going to speak?
So I've gone ahead and unmuted everyone.
Okay.
What's even more helpful is if you will mute yourself if you are not going to be speaking or if you have background noise. And if you think that it's possible, if you can chat your questions into the chat box, That makes it really easy to keep folks in order. You can also raise your hand. And if you're on a phone, just go ahead and ask your question when you have a time. And if you're typing, you should definitely mute. Thank you.
Well, I have a question. This is Christina Conklin in Half Moon Bay, California.
Yes.
And okay, so our congregation is fairly socially active, but we work in these silos. So we work with labor unions on certain issues, and then we try to come together with the Muslim congregation when they're feeling vulnerable, and then led mostly the environmental initiatives. And it feels very siloed, and we all believe in everything you've laid out, and I'm wondering, what are the very practical steps to get there? I mean, you talked about legislation and conferences, and I think we believe in that paradigmatic shift. I know that, but we don't know how to take the steps that actually. We're part of an interfaith action, alliance. Our minister is wonderful at building bridges and wants to mostly partner with other organizations rather than start something brand new. I'm just wondering, what are the practical things I can do to take back to my congregation?
Well, thank you for that question. I think one of the first things I'd say is that any potential successful movement really needs to begin with forming relationships, coming to appreciate different people's concerns and what brings different people to the table when we're talking about these issues. So one of the first things I'd say is the work that you've done is a great basis to begin to build upon. I will suggest, that you come and become part of the larger JAM network as we do the work that we're doing, but B, that you can dig down deep on those relationships, bring people to the table. And one of the things that rallies people more than anything else is coming together to work on a common project. So one of the things that we're doing in the state of North Carolina now, NC Warren has helped to try to move us towards a different paradigm of relationship with Duke Energy. Duke Energy supplies all the power from North Carolina. They have exclusive rights to it. They have eliminated third-party sales. But what we're proposing is, what if we get a number of congregations together and we go to Duke Energy and say, we'd like it if you would help us to solarize our own congregations, Christian, Muslim, Jewish, Baha'i, UU. We'd like it if you'd help to solarize our congregations, and then utilize that as a paradigm to talk about solar energy, how it works. You might even be eligible for tax credits from the United States government to pay for this, and our congregations will be able to pay back for the solar panels as they pay their energy bills over the next several years. But this is an opportunity for us to come together on a common goal and bring people to the table. If we can come up with a project, or if you can come up with a project that might excite the people in your own community, this might be a wonderful way of bringing them to the table, keeping them at the table, and beginning to talk about these larger fusion issues.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Rodney, I don't know if you can see in the side column in the chat that there's a question from Irene Keim. Amen and blessed be. What challenges have you addressed in forming a network of organizations with each of their own missions, actions, and donors?
Yeah, I think this is one of the big issues, and I don't know that we've fully resolved this. We have had several organizations that have been instrumental. So one of the things that we talk about is sharing resources. Joel Siegel, who I think is on the line tonight, is one of the key leaders in this regard. Joel has been talking for a long time about one of the major problems with 501c3s is that we all have our donor bases. We all try to protect our own sources, our own foundational support. We want to make sure that we keep that intact. And we also have our own mission statements that fundamentally limit what it is that we do. But part of what has made Jammin' work so well so far is that we've had different organizations that have contributed our staff to us, have contributed some of the resources that we need for the different events that we've put in place. The National Election Defense Coalition has given us a great deal of resources. We've gotten a great deal of resources from the Hip Hop Caucus and from other groups that have participated. Greenpeace has promised to give us both some part-time staff work and other resources. So it's been a very useful way of bringing people together and sharing the resources that we have. Now, we haven't fully worked this out yet. I'm sure that there will be always issues about what we can contribute, what we can't. But if you think about this way of going forward, sharing our resources instead of competing for those resources, it really does offer us the opportunity to work on those bigger issues that often transcend the limited scope of the work that we do on a regular basis. And we can partner on that without diverting too much of our resources away from it. If we can put 2% of what it is that we're doing into a common pot and it can be matched by 2% from 3 or 4 other groups, that's a sizable amount of money that can be used to achieve a larger goal, like writing a bill in Congress, like beginning to work on a larger issue in the movement, or working on a new paradigm for the way that we can enact a climate change policy at the municipal level.
Wow. What other questions do people have? Rodney, one of the things you mentioned made me realize I thought Jannon was more localized or more regional. You're saying it's national.
JAMN is actually a group that started nationally. It began at that national conference at UDC, but it has functioned literally. Our trial balloon for the local organizing was done here in Charlotte, North Carolina. And what we really wanted to do was to find out, how does this work on the local level? What can we begin to do when we bring activists from Greenpeace, Sierra Club, League of Conservation Voters together with the NAACP, with these other groups that are involved in the local area? Can we work together? And what we found that, yeah, we can. And there are a lot of issues that overlap. We're like Venn diagrams. There's a lot of overlap in our work. And if we can focus on those areas of overlap, it can be highly effective. That was why we did our initial conference on October the 3rd of last year. And we were surprised, again, during a hurricane, the amount of support, the amount of people that came out to participate in this event, braved the hurricane and said, the hurricane is an example of why it is that we need to come together to address this concern. I'm starting to echo.
I think you're all right. Go ahead.
Okay.
Oh, you are echoing. That's right.
Yeah. Yeah. So this has become a way of organizing locally, and then using that local organizing activity as a model that we can use, hopefully, to reproduce our work in different areas around the country. One of the areas that I think Joel Siegel might want to talk about is that we're thinking about how can we move this to Minnesota. There's a desire there to do some similar work. We've also had people from the Washington, D.C. area talk about how to do this type of work, and also from rural Pennsylvania, think about how they can begin to come together to do this work. So we've got a good model together that we really would like to reproduce for the local work, but we continue to organize on the national level to achieve those larger issues of change in Congress, to work on legislative change and legislative solutions. In essence, we won't be able to do this type of work. We won't be able to make the type of transition that we need unless we harness the power of the federal government, because only the federal government has the type of money that we need in order to make these changes.
Rodney, I see another question. I don't know if you can see it. From Leslie. Our congregation, which is about 1,000 members, has an active climate change group which is networked with a local action coalition in the community. Our problem is getting the cooperation and prophetic voice from our pulpit, the ministers. What can we do to change this?
And that is a question that I wrestle with all the time. How do we begin to encourage our religious leaders to engage this in a more significant way, to bring the prophetic action to this larger movement? One of the things I would suggest is to begin to engage 2 or 3 of them in beginning to write, take a theological perspective on this. So perhaps even having a project that says, what do we as Baptists, as UUs, as Presbyterians, as Quakers, as Jews, how do we view the notion of climate and creation care from our own perspectives? What does that look like? And perhaps even developing a resource that might be reflections from several different religious leaders on why it is that God leads us to be involved in reversing climate change. Get them to start thinking of it. Invite them into that conversation from their own perspective. once they're able to do that, then have them become experts, inviting their colleagues to join in this conversation as well. So if you get a few people involved in this and you get them committed to thinking about this in this way, it's likely that this idea will be able to spread more readily.
There are lots of opportunities that you're bringing up. I'm wondering if anybody has additional questions. I don't see any in the chat. Feel free, if you'd like to unmute yourself, to do that, to ask a question, or write it into the chat box.
I would like to ask a question. We have in Gainesville, Florida, we've just dissolved our Action Network, which was a group of about 12 churches, which just seemed like we weren't able to get the churches working together anymore like we used to. So you mentioned to start, you would form relationships. Okay, I feel like we had done that. What work on projects, we had done that, but it fell apart. So what did we not do, or what would we do next if we tried again?
I don't know that it's a failure when such efforts fall apart. I think sometimes it's just the life of the organization. We in Charlotte had an organization called Helping Empower Local People. It was our IAF organizing group, and it had been in existence for several years. It had run a good course, but eventually it went out of existence. It faded. In its path and its place, we developed a new group called the Charlotte Clergy Coalition for Justice. Right now, it's one of the most vital connectives in the city. It has 4 different groups, a track that works on LGBTQ issues, a track that works on environmental justice issues, a track that works on race and economic justice issues. And I'm forgetting the 4th one. I don't know why I forgot the 4th one. But it's been vital in this. A matter of fact, this was the organization that was nimble enough during the recent Charlotte uprising to be able to address that concern, to put clergy on the street every night, and to begin to think about a theological way of getting through this. So what I'm trying to say is that perhaps it was time for that organization to go on, but perhaps that opens up space for a new organization to come to be. And if you come up with a new organization with a great motivational vision, like hopefully what the Justice Action Mobilization Network can offer, then that might be a way of unifying. And also, if you can come up with an organization that has larger connections. So how can we replicate what's been done in other cities? How can we be a local expression of what's being done on a national level? That might also engender some larger support from the congregations at the table. Thank you.
I have another question here from Dave Lindsay. How do we cope with the election of Donald Trump? He seems to be against everything we are working toward.
Amen. And thank you for that question. And actually, this is a Joel Siegel type question. I don't know if Joel's on the line. Would love to have him jump in on this. But let me say this. You're on the line?
Yes.
Joel was just talking to me about how the Justice Action Mobilization Network, under this new paradigm, is going to have to shift to more of a resistance movement. We're going to have to be focused on standing up and addressing these concerns, pushing the government to make changes where we could be in partnership with the Obama administration in a more direct way. Joel, please.
Well, it was nice to be able to have dinner with the UUs tonight. I was sort of like self-conscious about eating, but one of my closest friends is Shelley Moskowitz, and I wanted to know if she's still the lobbyist for the UUs in DC. That doesn't ring a bell. Okay. I couldn't hear the audio.
No, the answer is no. She retired.
Okay. Oh, good. Retirement's a good thing. Well, thank you for allowing me to be on the call. I'm the national director and co-founder of Jammin'. I'm also the Unitarian Universalist Church is across the street from where I live, where I am a member. And it's great to have Professor Dr. Rodney Sadler, who's my best friend here, who got me out of retirement. I worked for Congressman John Conyers for 15 years and was really blessed and fortunate to have led the single-payer Medicare for All movement there and global AIDS. And now I'm in the grassroots after being in government for 26 years. And I think a lot of my strategy is based on power. How do you pass legislation? How do you build coalitions to pass bills? And my mentor, of course, was Martin Luther King, who employed an inside-outside strategy to pass the 64 and 65 Civil Rights Act. That's basically what we're basing our movement on. And we have about, according to scientist Lester Brown, we have 10 years to make the bulk of the transition off of fossil fuels to clean energy. And most people don't realize the emergency that we're in. 10 years is 10 years. It's not a long time. And the majority of scientists around the world, there's no dispute that unless we get off of fossil fuels, we're looking at severe famine, weather changes that we've never seen. Well, we're seeing Katrina and Sandy. In Africa, a lot of water in the underground aquifers are going to dry up, and the riverbeds are already drying up. Alabama experiencing a drought. Texas, drought. California, I think it's fifth year. We've never been faced with our own extinction before. So we cannot organize the way that we used to organize. Mm-hmm. We have to build one united front. And basically what many of us did is we read the Pope's encyclical. And if you have not read the Pope's encyclical, I'm a Jewish guy and a Unitarian and a Buddhist, and I read the Pope's encyclical. But what he did was he did a synthesis of battling climate change and ending poverty. And JAMA is basically based on that paradigm. And what we found out is that was something that crossed all color lines, you know, saving the planet by moving towards clean energy, millions of green jobs that can be created. Rodney told you all the advantages. But where we're at now with JAMA is how do we bring in our local communities? And I wanted to give you 3 ways we can do that. We have a national steering committee, and I know we're over 50 organizations, from the Black farmers, Hispanic farmers, retired Hill staffers, members of Congress who can't identify themselves as members of Congress, the African leaders, Greenpeace, Sierra Club, I could go on and on. Then we have an executive committee, but we've established something very important, and that is a leadership Congress. And the theory behind the leadership Congress, and then I'll close, is that any person who wanted to be part of this movement could join the leadership Congress, and we're going to have phone calls about every 3 months with the steering committee and the executive board and the leadership Congress. So this was I'm a student of history, and I'm sure that many of you are familiar with the African National Congress and the Indian National Congress, or even SCLC, which was Martin King's Southern Christian Leadership. That was the conference, right, Rodney? SCLC. And so let's say you're in a Unitarian in Charlotte, North Carolina, or in Wyoming. You could join the leadership Congress of JAMA, and you're going to be part of our movement. You'll be part of our lobbying days in Congress. We start our briefings in just a few weeks in the House and Senate. We're working on a gold standard bill that would transition us rapidly off of coal, gas, and oil to renewable energy with top scientists, engineers, academics. We can't do that without a national movement, and the UUs can be integral in this process. So in order to get in touch with Rodney, I'm sure you're going to give your number or your email out. Any and every person on this call that wants to be part of the JAMA network, we'd like to be your home, because alone we cannot win. And if we stay in our silos, we literally can go extinct. But thank you for giving me a chance to help. The other thing that we keep it fun. We're bringing in musicians, artists. Our conference at New York University, it's being sponsored by 12 departments, being sponsored by the music school and art. And we're having a contest with artists and musicians to see who could come up with the best art or song on climate change, and they're going to get a scholarship from Harriet Fulbright and the former executive vice president of the Cheesecake Factory, Russell Green, who's our honorary co-chair. there are way more of us than there are of those in the fossil fuel industry and those who are against the great transition. We have to unify, and we want everyone to be part of this extended family because we're all human beings. We just have to work together and make sure you focus on diversity. We're bringing in Africans, Muslims, Asians, Hispanics, Jewish people, gay, straight, Native American, and that is where our movement is so beautiful. It's this extended family of climate justice advocates from not only here, and then we just extended to Liberia. So we have a lot of work to do, but we could do it a lot better if we can get you involved. So thank you for letting me share.
Thank
you. Thank you for that, Joel. And if I could say a couple of other things, I think that you're right. Trump has been working against everything that we stand for. And if we start to think about the Jamin model, this paradigm, it represents everything that he opposes. If we can organize around this model and suggest that this is a more morally effective and efficient model, a model that truly does bring, where he talks about division, talks about unity, where he lifts up the fossil fuel industry, provides an alternative, where he proposes perpetuation of an unjust status quo. This gives us an alternative to change. If we can truly stand behind this, then I think it gives us a better opportunity to change. And also, if we can think about this as not just a climate movement, but a climate and justice movement. We need that fusion if we're going to have success. And can you imagine what it would look like if, when we go to Washington, D.C., to protest, confront, and even to sit down and develop policy, we're not just bringing people from Greenpeace or Sierra Club, but NAACP and 50 other different groups from around the nation, as well as religious groups together and saying, we all think that this is important. We all think we need to work towards a solution to these problems. We all won't go away, won't sit down, won't stop until we see that victory accomplished.
Rodney, there's another question here from Kathy. It says, from the election, it is apparent there is a lot of tech anxiety in the U.S. Seems to me if we get rid of coal, oil, and gas, we need first to ensure the folks have a job. How do we prepare people for those jobs? And Joel, I think it would be helpful if you would mute yourself if you have not already. So thank you. Did you hear that question well enough, Rodney?
Yes, thank you. I think that this is one of the major concerns that we've had. In part, what we've thought about as we talked about moving to this renewable energy grid is that we will try to bring in people who've been left out of the economic opportunity from the beginning. So African Americans, minorities, Latinos, people who've been formerly incarcerated, how do we begin to train them to take some of these new jobs? But we've always realized that the people of West Virginia who are involved in coal mining, the people of Texas who are involved in oil production, they need to be able to begin to shift too. So how do we begin to bring the training to them? There are any number of groups right now that are already involved in developing the training to fulfill these types of jobs. We need to begin to help people to be guided to these positions so they'll be ready for this new economy. Here locally, I had a conversation with the Urban League recently, and they said that they're the largest solar trainers, people that train people in solar energy establishment in the state of North Carolina. And in part, nobody knows about it because people that aren't part of that network don't have a sense of it. How do we lead people to these places where this type of training is already going on? And how do we ensure that there are jobs for them when they come out, that there are places that are already working on this? I think that can begin to ease the tension and ease the fear that people's jobs will be going away. No, your jobs aren't going away. We're training you in new jobs, and these jobs are local jobs. Solar installation is something that takes place locally. Outfitting for environmental energy efficiency, these are local jobs, things that have to remain locally. So by giving people opportunities in these new fields, it gives them an opportunity to have a job that can't be shipped overseas, that won't go away when the energy goes away, and that they'll have a wonderful opportunity for economic prosperity for the foreseeable future.
Well, it sounds like looks like we have a queue of questions. You're getting us going here, Rodney. I also realized that there is someone who's still not muted. If you would take a look and make sure you're muted. There's a lot of background noise. So a fairly easy question to answer, Joel, let's see, I think, Joel, you were talking about Jammin'. And so what is this question, I think, Rodney, you could let people know how they sign up for Jammin'. And is the answer just a bit on the website?
Joel? I think you muted yourself, Joel.
Now you're unmuted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
You can hear me now. Okay. So I'm new to this technology. Sorry. If you would like to join Jammin' tonight, I'd like for you to email me at Joel.
I'm
coming to the refrigerator. .r.siegel. S-E-G-A-L.
So, Joel, would you take a moment, just pause? I'm going to ask Elizabeth to mute everyone and then unmute Joel and Rodney. Thank you. Okay. Joel, would you continue the instructions about how to get in touch with you? And then I'd like to go back to Rodney with a couple more questions.
Sure. If anybody in this call would like to immediately become part of the Jammin' family, and we are a family, it's Joel, Joel.r.siegel, S-E-G-A-L, at gmail.com. I'll repeat it one more time, and also give you my number. joel.r.siegel at gmail.com. And here's my phone number, 571-344-1518. We are not a top-down, we're really a network. We're a bottom-up, not a top-down organization. That's what makes us a bit different. We definitely got a decision-making structure, but the idea is that it's grassroots. And I just wanted to mention that when I worked in Congress for Congressman John Conyers, I was his energy and climate LA. And we could not get support on a lot of bills about climate because the members of Congress staff would say, well, what about jobs in Louisiana? What about jobs in coal country in West Virginia? And the studies show there would be millions of jobs, literally, created in the clean energy sector, and that's empirical, and it's technologically feasible. And we're going to be doing teach-ins across the country. I'd love to have our first one at the UUs, at the Universalist Unitarian churches across the country, because we're going to have to teach people how to answer those very, very important questions. And if we just divert the subsidies that we use for coal and oil and nuclear and transition that money for retraining and R&D, we could easily put literally, I believe it's 3 million to work in the clean energy sector.
So Joel, do you know how to use the chat column on the right-hand side? Well, what I'm going to suggest, maybe what we can do is that Elizabeth and Allie and I will make sure that your contact information gets distributed to the people on this call, and that there are a number of broad networkers on this call who we will probably seek out, connect Rodney and Joel, to see how we can work with your process and integrate it with the kind of work that many of us are doing in different ways. So what I've got here are 9 more questions. And what I'd like to do, Rodney, I wonder if it makes sense if I read them,
Please.
all of them, and then you create how you'd like to respond to them, and then probably in about 15 minutes, it'll be time to shift into small groups, or maybe even 10 minutes, depending on how long it takes. So I will read the questions that I've got here. Actually, Earl Coteen has 2 questions which are not written down, and so why don't I just hang on to that, Earl. There are a lot of construction jobs, but they only last a short time. There are places where we can do, I see, we want instructions in the chat line, and I see now that, Joel, your information is in the chat line from Elizabeth. Earl Coteen, would you please go ahead and ask your questions? Feel free to unmute yourself and ask away.
Thanks. So I'm UU minister, and I'm in Berkeley, California, and these days I'm beginning to feel like I'm in another country. All of our progressive candidates won. We blocked fracking. We did a number of other things in a very successful manner. And I'm a DC boy, but so I really wonder what's happening outside of California. We are talking about seceding from the union. That would probably be a good thing for us. Might be bad for you, but
Yes,
it might be good for us. No, in all seriousness, just a couple of questions/observations. With the exception of a few people in places that are already at risk, like Florida, and a few more places that are environmentally aware, like California, I have found it very difficult to get most UUs connected to environmental justice organizations that are already out there. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. There's already a Climate Justice Alliance that's national. There's a Moving Forward network that's national. They are not doing fusion, which is why one of the reasons I'm on this call. But I find it very difficult to get UU congregations to outreach to disadvantaged communities. I have to go into the disadvantaged communities, and there we find people who are already experts in this. Mm-hmm. But getting UUs out of the pews is a major challenge. The second, so any suggestions around that would be helpful. And also just to what extent Jamin has been connected with this. And also other national, efforts that are already out there. Because it seems like every time Massachusetts or Florida or someplace else wants to reinvent the wheel, and their focus is, there's more of a focus on sea level rise in Florida, whereas there's more of a focus on the coal trains and the crude by rail and so forth out here. And then my other question or observation, we've been fighting this question about jobs for a long time. Focus out here these days is starting to argue for a guaranteed minimum income, because the solar and other types of jobs that we're talking about do not compensate as well as steel workers and construction workers and so forth. And even though the fossil fuel industry is lying left and right, they do indeed pay a better wage than you get for installing solar panels. Oh, and I forgot, there was one other thing. Okay. I'm interested in what you think, particularly those of you who are in states where this is particularly difficult, about voter suppression. I spent election day, after spending some time at the polls helping the Richmond Progressive Alliance, looking at the best democracy that money can buy, which was just horrifying. I had no idea how bad voter suppression was in the United States and whether it might have turned the election.
Yes.
So those are the 3 topics.
Let me start with the first one, and I'm going to turn the voter suppression question over to Joel, because he's been you all don't know who Joel Siegel is. Joel Siegel is the man who single-handedly kept the movement that eventually led to Obamacare going. And in DC, this man is a living legend. But one of the things he just most recently did is, again, went to DC in 3 months, started a anti-voter suppression caucus that now has 71 members. This is unheard of. No one has ever done this before. And they're beginning to talk about, we've got a meeting in DC on November the 16th, when we're going to go to have a larger briefing to talk about the problems that took place in this election and begin to think about what it is that we need to do, and probably call for a Department of Justice investigation of some of these voter suppression tactics, hopefully leading to a larger set of legislation that we're going to try to put forward, probably difficult to get through with the Republican Congress, but begin to address the fact that there need to be consequences for voter suppression activities. These are things that work against the Voting Rights Amendment, et cetera, et cetera. And how do we also get Section 4 reestablished so that Section 5 can be thoroughly enforced with the Voting Rights Amendment. So I'll turn that over to Joel in a second. But that first question I wanted to just sort of touch on, how do we get people together? Well, I think in most UU congregations, there are environmental groups and there are social justice groups. Why about trying to get those two to come together and meet together and have conversations about where their issues and interests overlap, where it is that some of the work that they're doing might benefit from the knowledge that the other brings. And that might be a good way to begin to get those conversations started for fusion work. And then also try to see what might a project be that we could begin to work on together. Now, that might not be a large solution for the nation, but it might be something you could do in your own congregation to begin to get some of that work started. Let me turn it over to Joel. Thank you. I think you're muted, Joel.
Right, and Joel, I think probably if we can do this for another couple of years, but then we should probably shift into small groups so people can really dig in and their local and regional areas.
Minutes, not years, maybe.
Sorry.
A couple of years.
We're going to be on this.
Okay, take your time.
Being president.
Well, actually, I'll be brief, but what was the gentleman's name from Berkeley that just spoke?
Reverend Earl Coteen.
Well, you asked some of the most salient, brilliant questions. In terms of voter suppression, we now have a 71-member voting rights caucus led by Congressman VC John Lewis and my former boss, Congressman Conyers. But then we just created with Jesse Jackson and Reverend Sadler and Barbara Onwine, who for 23 years was the executive director of the leadership a lawyers committee, I believe, on civil rights under the law. We just spent 3 days. We had a war room of about 20 attorneys and volunteers, and we got flooded with calls. And we had an emergency call with Reverend Jackson today, and we've made a decision. We're having a strategy meeting next week to go ahead and start the campaign to restore the voting rights bill. 1965 Voting Rights Amendment got gutted by the Supreme Court in what's called Shelby versus Holder. And this is directly related to our work on climate and environmental justice, because if we have millions of people disenfranchised, we think it could be in the tens or hundreds of thousands. We're not going to be able to have state legislatures or a Congress or a White House sympathetic to our agenda. So that was I think the main question, right, that you had asked about voter suppression. Was there anything else that I missed?
No, that was the voter suppression. My second question was about what outreach you're making to environmental justice organizations that are already on the ground. So, for example, the Climate Justice Alliance is throughout the United States. The Moving Forward Network is throughout the United States. And I don't see, we're out here, we're well wired with organizations like the Asian Pacific Environmental Network and the various organizations, the American Lung Associations, others that do climate and climate health type issues. But often when I go to visit other congregations outside of the Bay Area, I don't find the same level of interaction with the justice organizations that are already there.
Yeah, I just came back from the EPA's Environmental Justice National Conference, and it was called by Mustafa Ali, who is Obama's senior advisor on environmental justice, and he and I worked for Conyers for 3 years together, and it was one of the most amazing conferences I've ever been to in my life. And all I can tell you is that every environmental justice organization that was at that conference, they're all part of this network. So when we founded the conference at UDC that Reverend Sadler actually helped organize, our paradigm was a bit different. We wanted to form more of a communities of color led climate justice movement because we felt like that wing had not been developed and that we couldn't win the transition to clean energy if we had a predominantly white, climate movement. That's why we lost cap and trade. I was in Congress when we lost cap and trade when we had the House and the Senate. I'm sorry, the Democrats. I don't know if you're 501c3. So the environmental justice leaders, we invited them and they spoke on the panels, and we have a beautiful symbiotic relationship with them because if we stop using coal, then there won't be that coal ash problem polluting our waters right? And then there's a chemical they use for the coal scrubbing that goes in the water. That's eliminated. And you won't be breathing in the coal dust, whether you're a worker or breathing in coal particles, which causes disproportionate rates of cancer and emphysema in the Black community. 80% of all coal plants are in the Black community. So the answer is it's not easy now, hasn't been easy. And the other thing, because I believe in being honest, is we're not like a $10, $20 million organization, but we have a lot of heart. We do have funding. So if you can help us bring in the groups where you live as to be part of the network, that would be fantastic because we can't do this by ourselves. That's why we're called the Justice Action Mobilization Network. We're expanding the network.
Thank you.
I'm going to suggest that actually we begin to shift into small groups. And in that way, I think Elizabeth has organized us so that there are many organizers who are already doing this work on a national level or on a regional level will be together. And then, so I think, Elizabeth, we should go ahead and break into smaller groups. Forewarned that our time will be up in small groups at a specific time. Elizabeth, would you tell us when that will be?
I sure can. So we have switched between ending at 7:30 and ending at 7 Mountain Time, which is 9 or 9:30 Eastern. Is there anyone who has to be off by 9?
I think there may be some people who naturally end up leaving.
Okay, so if folks need to head out, they sure can. We will try to wrap up and come back to this room together by 7:15, 9:15 Eastern. And then
Half hour from now.
About 10 minutes to share 1 or 2 things that your group found most interesting or most helpful from your conversation. And then we'll close out and be done by 7:30, 9:30 Eastern. So folks, if you are using your screen for video and also using a phone for audio, I need you to tell me that right now, what your video screen name is and what your area code is. Otherwise, your phone and your video may end up in different chat rooms, and that's really confusing for you and
split right down the middle.
All right, I'm not hearing that from anyone.
Wait.
I'm gonna unmute for just a moment. Just to make sure. So do I have anyone on the phone who is using a video?
Say that again.
Oh. 1 sec.
Elizabeth, we really can't.
Yep. All right, I'm muting everyone. So if you have the video, please put what your phone's area code is, type that into the chat box, and that will let me know.
If we do have video, but not phone.
Yeah, so if you're on your computer for video, so you can go in the chat box. So I've got Cappy, and your phone is an 805 area code. All right. And all right, and D Mitel's is 650. All right, so setting up the breakout rooms with.
And Rodney, if you feel comfortable facilitating the group that you end up in, would that be all right? Rodney, are you still with us?
Oh, he seems to have fallen off.
All right.
So
if you would choose one person from that group, Elizabeth, to be facilitator.
All right. So Karen, I've got you facilitating in yours.
Very well.
And I will facilitate in breakout room 2. Irene, would you be willing to facilitate in breakout room 1? Or actually, Joe, if you don't mind, you could do that.
Okay. Let's go for it.
All right.
We have a half hour and then we'll come back together.
In a few minutes. All right. And Leslie, I'm not finding a way to put you into a breakout room. I had this problem with Cindy last time. I'm not sure how to do that. But I hate to leave you all on your own in the main room. So it may be that you need to call in with your phone, and then I'll be able to sort you into a room. If there's some reason that your computer and the breakout rooms aren't playing well with others. So do you have that phone number, or should I?
I can't call in on my phone.
Oh, okay. Well, shoot. I hate to leave you and run away. That is such a weird glitch, though. Huh. I wonder. Nope. Yeah. Well, if you want,
go ahead with the other people.
Okay. Well, we will be back in this room in about 20 minutes, 15 minutes. And if you want to also reflect on things that you think have been helpful in your organizing work, to share with us as well when we come back. We'd love to hear your words as well.
Thanks, I have a lot of experience.
All right. Well, I will see you again soon. Sorry for the technical glitch.
Lindsay and Irene Keim and Joel Siegel, and there's Elizabeth. Hello. So,
actually is part of a common work. We all are trying to make, this is the way I like to say it, and you've heard me say this several times tonight, a cleaner world, a greener world, and a better world. By cleaner world, a world where we shift away from carbon-based fossil fuels, a greener world, a world where we use renewable energy sources, and a better world, a world where we can begin to make some progress on justice issues, make a more just, fairer, equitable world, a world where we can alleviate some of the pressures that dealing with our economy have put on those who have been least lost and otherwise left out. I'm hoping that we can truly begin to have that kind of paradigmatic shift that I talk about tonight, so that we can begin to have a society that truly is worthy of our best selves, our better selves. And maybe in the midst of these dark days, these days when we're thinking about what does a Trump administration look like, days when we're thinking about the proliferation of racism, sexism, homophobia, all of these isms that seem to be on the rise today, we can develop a different paradigm that offers people a new vision and a new sense of hope.
Preach it, I say. Thank you. Thank you. And Elizabeth, did you want to close with anything in particular based on your conversation with your group?
Our group had a really lovely conversation, and actually I think Earl might be able to sum that up a little bit for us.
Great. Would you be willing, Earl, for a brief summary?
Sure. You know how well I am brief. I think what we said was that it's really, skill building is really important, whether we're talking about lobbying or organizing or whatever. That getting people together to build skills rather than just to talk issues is a very powerful technique. And that it's very important to, sort of start where you are. Find out what's going on in your immediate community, what organizations are available to help you, and ways in which you can let disadvantaged communities and communities of color and communities that are most suffering right now take the lead and guide us in how we can be of support. So that when we show up together as multiracial groups, when we show up together as multi-class groups, the legislators and others and the regulators see that there is a common thread, common interest.
Thank you, Earl. Is there a person from another group that has not been represented yet who'd like to speak?
I guess I could say a little bit about the group that Joel led. And my notes, he said first, to bring people together, educate the community about the climate crisis that is now, make clear that we're in it, and then lobby about a bill. And he mentioned House HR 540 in Congress, some bill, and then try to connect to a national effort, and you'll maybe have more effect. And he said, have fact sheets to give legislators and others that don't understand, and talk about how we need to do this for our grandchildren.
Mm-hmm.
And he suggested holding a town hall meeting, maybe in a church, and include food and music to make it fun too.
Lovely. Elizabeth, was there an additional group? I think we're done then. I think that we will be posting this video once it's edited so that you can bring it back to other people you would like to tell about this conversation. And we will be having a meeting again in January, and then again February, March, April, and May. So keep your eye out for each of those different events. And boy, I wish I had my hymnal right in front of me, because I would read that reading that starts with "The road is long," and it's so easy to feel like you're alone, but you are not alone, that we are in this together. And so with that in our hearts, I say thank you to all of you for the ministries that you do, for the passion you have and the skill with which you carry out the work you do, and we'll stay connected. Thank you so much for being together tonight. Elizabeth, Allie, thank you very much. Rodney Sadler, you are wonderful. We really look forward to learning more about how things go for you, and we'll follow your leadership. Thanks, Joel. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Night.
And thank you.
Thank you.
Good night,
Good night.
everyone.
It was a very good thing to do after
night.
the election. It cheered me up.
I'm
Wait.
so
Oh, good.
glad. Go
Amen.
in peace.
Lots to do and lots of good people to do it.
Yeah,
That's right. That's right.
yeah.
Take care.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night, all.